The most famous atheist who ever lived once wrote, "I would believe in the Redeemer if his followers looked more redeemed." Friedrich Nietzsche, the great philosopher of the 19th century, wrote those words. His father, believe it or not, was a Lutheran pastor in a small German town. And just imagine, if someone could have told those Lutherans back there in Germany, if you look a little bit joyful, the whole intellectual history of the world would be changed. But I guess nobody thought to tell them. Now, I don't want to pick on the Lutherans. Let's pick on the Presbyterians. Not too long ago, there was a journalist in the United States who was describing a certain politician, and he was describing him as with a personality that was dour. By that, this guy wasn't very happy, And then at the end of the article, to make his point, he said, "And he dresses like a Presbyterian." Well, that gave me an image in my head. Now, let's see if it's the same image you have. A white shirt, not buttoned down. A dark suit, either black or so blue that it looks black. Are you with me here? His shoes are black, but not wingtips, not like mine. And his socks are black, and he has on a very thin tie. And guess what color the tie is? You got it. You know the same Presbyterian as I do. This is a joyful Sunday. Gaudete. That's a Latin word. It's not on the test. But it's the joyful Sunday. We light a rose-colored candle, a pink candle, and we hear these fabulous words from the prophet Zephaniah. He says, now I knew I was going to forget this, so I wrote it down. I've been practicing this by memory, but for some reason I want to miss it. He will take great delight in you. God will take great delight in you. He will quiet you with his love. He will rejoice over you with singing. Here's the picture of a God who rejoices over us. God's got a good voice, when God sings. And God is singing over our lives. Just imagine that. God is singing over our lives and quieting us. Not to be anxious, not to be worried. And the same God takes delight. God delights in us. Those are great words for a joyful Sunday, aren't they? Aren't they? These are the greatest words I've ever heard. Aren't they the greatest words? How could you live without this? And then the Apostle Paul, of course, he writes in that book that prison epistle to the Philippian church, rejoice always. So we have this double rejoicing going on. We have this God who rejoices in us, and we have our lives rejoicing in God. This is the Sunday that we bring both of those together, the rejoicing Sunday. Now, as we know, joy is not the same as happiness. Happiness is something that spikes and then it's gone pretty quick. And if it's happiness that we want, well, we can get that. I mean, you can get happiness with a bottle or with a needle or with a pill. Or if that's not your thing, go out and buy a new pair of shoes or some luxury item. Spend a lot of money. You will be happy all day. But then, of course, pretty soon, just another pair of shoes. It's just another piece of jewelry. Happiness doesn't stick. Joy, on the other hand, joy is deep. It runs deep in our lives. And it doesn't come and go. It is always there, always deep within us. Well, that doesn't mean that we don't also express the other emotions. It's not that we're un-Presbyterian all the time, but joy is always there. Happiness comes and goes, and the tears come too. That's a part of life. We're joyful even sometimes in the tears, aren't we? This is the joyful Sunday, but Thursday night we're going to come and celebrate a longest night. A few of us will gather here in quietness, and we'll get in touch with the struggles that are a part of our lives that come into the midst of this holiday season. And maybe we'll share with each other some hugs and blessings, because life is difficult. All of us are struggling. All of us have the tears. And so the joy and the tears, they're all part of life. They all belong together. Now, we are called to be joyful Christians. The gift of joy is God's gift to us. But it's not easy in this world and in this culture in which we live. This has been called a culture of chronic anxiety. And I don't think that you have to be persuaded of that. All you need to do is just turn on the television set. And you'll see all of the chronic anxiety being lived out among us. I turn on the news. Well, I can't watch it. These people are all shouting at each other at the same time. That's a sign of chronic anxiety when we can't listen to each other. When we're so threatened, we think that someone else's idea is going to pollute our mind and heart. Culture of chronic anxiety, of road rage, people in a hurry. It's toxic. We live in a toxic culture in which people cannot hear each other, cannot listen to each other, cannot live together without being angry, it seems, so much of the time. One of the signs of a toxic culture like ours is the quick fix. If you're in a hurry, it's the quick fix that we want. Every time I go to the supermarket, I see a magazine, and it's always a new diet. Oh, it's a quick fix. You know, if you just eat this way, the pounds will just disappear. In fact, this last week I saw the best one. It wasn't in the supermarket. It was on the internet. And this is what it said. Lose 17 pounds in 7 days. Oh my gosh, who can believe that would be possible? But we know that it's not. Problems like our health, these are not quick fixes. These are issues that are long-term, that take time. And so the quick fix is everywhere. If you just read this book, you can fix. If you just elect this leader, it's a fix. If you just follow this recipe, 7 ways to whatever, the quick fix. It's all around us and it's all false. It's part of our toxic, chronic anxiety culture where we want something to happen. The other sign of a toxic culture is when we are so certain that we're right. The march of certainty. I'm right and you're wrong. Now, certainty is evidenced by how the cults have been moving and amassing more followers. People are leaving organized religion, the main line in other churches, but they don't stop believing. People never stop believing. They just exchange their belief system in another direction. Someone sent me an article about cults the other day, and in the article it said, there are now more witches than members of some mainline denominations. The cult of certainty. We follow in or fall in to these groups, these movements, these cults, these religious or political places where we have to be certain and right. Life is black and white. Life is right and wrong. Life is good and evil. And I am right and you are wrong. It's part of that toxic culture in which we live, this pull into certainty, this inability for us to live with ambiguity, with uncertainty, with the fact that problems are intricate and difficult and take time. No quick fixes. A toxic culture. I don't have to prove that to you, do you? You can see it, you can feel it. People being angry, anxious, in a hurry, yelling at each other. All of that is sick. It's toxic. A chronic, anxious time. And we live in it right now. And of course, as Christians, we live differently in the world than that. We are in the world, but we are not of the world. This is not our life at all. We live in a different kind of way. And so we claim these great words for the prophet that God takes delight in us. We don't have to be anxious about tomorrow. God takes delight in us. God quiets our hearts. In the midst of all of this noise, all of this anger, all of this shouting, God quiets our hearts. And God rejoices over us with singing. A God who sings over our lives. We live in this world in that way, not in an anxious, chronic, anxiety-driven world. It's interesting to me that when the explorers came over to this land, discovered what was here, starting with Columbus and all of the others, they didn't find what they were looking for. They wanted to go across Europe and into the Far East, but they were blocked. They wanted the spices and the silks and the good things that the Far East offered to them, and they couldn't get that way, so they decided to go in the opposite direction. Columbus wanted to discover Japan, and actually, even though he had 3 voyages to America, thought until the day he died that he had discovered Japan. But then all of the others came looking, sailing in across the waters to try to find the East. And they were so frustrated because the Americas were in the way. If the Americas just hadn't been there, they would have been fine. They were frustrated and they were always trying to find some magic route to get to the other side, to get into the East. It took people a long time. It took them generations to realize that what they had found was better than what they were looking for. That's a parable of our lives. We need to, if we're going to be joyful people, we have to be open to surprise. Christmas, the Christmas story, is a surprise story. Here's a young girl, pregnant, Mary, not married. What a surprise. Here are the shepherds out on the fields at night, just another long night, just another boring night of work, and the heavens open up, angels singing. What a surprise. Here are the Magi following a star. They don't know where they're going. They don't know where they're going to end up. It'll be a surprise, as our lives are. We bump into the Americas and think, oh my gosh, this is not what I want. Get me somewhere else. We have our setbacks. We have our dead-end roads. We have our disappointments, and we have our failures. And a joyful life turns on its head this whole thing of anxiety. Instead of saying, what is going to happen next that's bad? What bad thing is going to happen to me tomorrow? It's turned on its head. A joyful life says, I've run into a dead end. I've run into a failure. I've run into a roadblock. I can't go on. What good surprise does this mean? What good thing is going to happen to me because God is rejoicing over my life? My heart is quiet now. God delights in me. I know that's hard to believe. That's the miracle of this whole thing, isn't it? The miracle of Christmas. Don't ever say, oh, God may delight in somebody else, but God doesn't delight in me. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I've made so many mistakes. I've gone so many wrong directions. There's no possible way that God could look at me and delight. God doesn't lie. That's God's business. You may not be delighting in yourself as much as you should, but never forget, God has decided. God does not lie. God has decided to delight in you. God's heart beats faster because of you. You are the apple of God's eye. All of God's love, nothing held back, has been given to each one of us in equal measure. God could not love us more than what God loves us today, so God rejoices over us. I think of a mother holding a baby. That's the picture that comes to my mind. A mother holds the baby and rejoices over what she holds. Holds the baby, and the baby that was fidgety and crying now is at peace. Heart at peace. And then mother begins to sing a lullaby to the child. That's the image I get from these words of Zephaniah. He will take great delight in you. I don't care what you hear the rest of your life. You'll never hear anything better than that. I don't care where you go, what you read, who you talk to. This is the most important thing that you can ever know. This is the good news. Never let this go. God delights. God quiets our hearts. Isn't that a good thing to feel and to know during this anxious, toxic, chronically anxious world? We can let our hearts be quieted. We're not in control, but God is. God calls us to his presence. There's peace. Tomorrow, we're in God's hands just like we are today. God sings over us, rejoices over us. God's got a good voice. God sings in tune. God's voice is wonderful. I know you think that you're the only one that's singing. No, God is singing. God is singing over us hymns of joy and wonder. I think I've told you on other occasions, I'm sure I have, that it wasn't my idea to move to Western Pennsylvania. You know that, don't you? I remember one day I had an interim in Kansas City, and I remember one day driving to a hospital. I drove to the hospital and I parked on a side street. I don't park in parking garages because I can never find my car. I can never find my car in a parking garage, so I always park outside. I can remember where I parked, and I walked into the hospital, and I got to the floor where I was supposed to visit a church member. And then it got confusing because they were in a kind of strange place. And so I had this, where do I go? Where do I turn? And finally, this young woman, she wasn't a nurse, or she wasn't dressed like one anyway. A very nice young woman. She says, "Let me take you." And we started walking down the hallway. And after we got a little ways, I said, "I'm going to miss this." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, Kansas City, it's the friendliest city in the world, right? Everyone in Kansas City is up to date and everyone is friendly. There's just no place like it." And I had gone to college, 17-year-old kid in Kansas City. I had friends in Kansas City that went back to 1960 when I was a teenager. I loved that place, and the people. I just thought there are no other people in the world. And so I said to this woman who was taking me down the hall, "I'm going to miss this because I'm moving to Pittsburgh." And I know that the people in Pittsburgh are not going to be anything like the people in Kansas City. I was so wrong. You see, what I needed to do, I should have known. I should have been able to hear these words of Zephaniah, that God delights in my life, that God quiets my heart, that God sings, rejoices over my life. I should have known. And you should know. You should know. Wherever you go next, whatever happens next, God is already there. Don't be like Columbus, frustrated that you ran into the Americas. For wherever it is that God's taking you, if we can be Advent people, if we're open to surprise, if we're able to wait and pray and see that wherever God is going to lead us, there will be the blessing. God will not stop singing over our lives, will not stop blessing, will not stop surprising us. So this is the joyful Sunday. Light the Advent candle of joy, the rose-colored candle. Don't act like a Presbyterian. At least today. Don't dress like a Presbyterian. And let others see the Redeemer, the joy in you. And wherever we go next, wherever that leads us, get ready for surprise. For God will be there. And the blessing and the joy will never end. Amen.